Welcome to a Modern Nonprofit podcast, powered by the Charity CFO, your compass for creative solutions in running your nonprofit. I'm Tosha Anderson, your host and guide through this nonprofit maze. From fundraising to volunteer management, we've got your back. Join us each episode for fresh, game-changing strategies that can make a real impact. Hey, nonprofit friends, we're back with another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. Today, I have a friend, Howard Levy. Howard, you are an expert in branding and marketing strategy. And we're going to be diving into the conversation about brand strategies for nonprofits and why it's important for a nonprofit to have a brand. Now, Howard, you and I were kind of joking offline before I hit record that although I'm a CPA during the day and I own an accounting firm, one of my real loves is the psychology around like branding and marketing and how I find it pretty fascinating, how people perceive our brands or our messaging or our purpose. And I think that's definitely an area that nonprofits have struggled with, let's be honest, usually because of the financial investment that goes into solid branding. But it's definitely an area that I think nonprofits are paying attention to now more than ever. And I'm excited to talk with you and just want to thank you in advance for this conversation to maybe give some tips, tricks, or hacks for nonprofit leaders that are starting to realize this is an area they need to pay more attention to.
Delighted to be here.
So let's just dive into the obvious question, Howard. Like, why is it important for nonprofit organizations to have a strong brand? This sounds like an easy question, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective and experience. Why is this so important, especially now?
Well, that's true. It is an important question. There's a lot of nonprofits out there, all competing for people's money and attention and, have missions to accomplish. And there's a lot of businesses out there as well competing for attention. So you need to stand out. If you're a nonprofit of any size, you want to make sure that your mission is clear and that people can identify when they need services or, you need to appeal to donors. I started the business 30 years ago, and at the time there were about half as many nonprofits in the United States as there are now. So that tells you something about the real growth. There's about 1.5 million, 1.6 million nonprofits now. And so the landscape, has changed a lot.
Yeah.
People have good intentions. They want to come out of college and start stuff, or there's more needs being identified, and there's just a general interest in wanting to have an impact. So with that kind of comes the obligation and responsibility to be able to hold your own, in the world. And it's not easy, especially for small organizations. You're doing great. You have providing some very valuable service to the community, the youth, or saving the environment, promoting arts. Whatever it is, but the other part of it is how do you gain traction, in the world, and how do you make sure you're known and people know about you and you can have a greater impact. So
Exactly.
That's what I've been doing, helping organizations to get that visibility.
Yeah, I mean, I can echo that. I mean, I see kind of similar but different statistics, somewhere between 1.7, 1.8 million nonprofits in the country, new nonprofits starting up every day. I saw one statistic over a same period of time, number of nonprofits grew by 25%, whereas for-profit businesses grew by, less than 0.5% or something like this. I mean, you could argue that there's less nonprofits, so statistically about, but the reality is, to your point, there's more and more organizations out there, and how do you kind of cut through the noise? And I say this a lot on the episodes. And I've definitely had this conversation before, but I really want to go back to what you were saying about clarifying what your purpose is and understanding who your different audiences are, right? And so specifically, I'll speak from my own experience because I, serve on boards and I've donated many times, and I come across a lot of information with different nonprofits. In many cases, people reach out to us because they're interested in maybe being a client of ours. And I start looking at some of their, external communication, whether it's their 990, right? Or it's their website, of course. And I can't make sense of what they do. And I think I'm a pretty savvy person in terms of like finding the public information out there. And sometimes I find that we use a lot of words to express the important work that we're doing, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense to the average person, much less somebody that's kind of familiar with even some of this jargon. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about branding. But I think, Howard, you would agree, like creating the brand and like a clear messaging is one thing, but then there's also the question about improving awareness and visibility. And so, maybe they have some of this, but how or maybe branding is a tool, or it's like, which comes first, the the cart or the horse? How do nonprofits improve awareness of their organization? How can they be seen or visible?
That's a great question. And, many organizations approach us in various stages of maturity, and they've
Mm,
achieved, some level of success. They've gotten to where they are. It could be around for 10 years, 40 years, 100 years. We had one organization around for 185 years.
wow.
But, things change. The world changes, organizations
Mm,
change. Maybe you've expanded your services, so now they're encompassing more. Population has changed, more areas. Could be geographically, you've
yeah.
changed. If you want to expand, a lot of organizations we work with are expanding nationally, start in one
Mm,
area, want to expand nationally, they want to expand internationally. So, all these changes bring us back to the mission. What is the mission? How is that articulated? And how does that have to be revamped in light of new changing situations? And often that's the prompt for looking at the brand, is to say, how have we changed and what do we need to do to maintain relevancy, for today's world? So let's go back to the mission and vision statement, the vision of what kind of world or society or area, we want to create, what is life like with our impact of our organization,
mm,
and make sure that is still relevant, because oftentimes the organization has just kind of outgrown it.
yeah.
And how do we have a galvanizing, aspirational mission that people want to support? It's
Mm,
totally fine to provide services, and those are very valuable. But if you really want to have traction in this world, you really plant the flag with a big, bold vision.
mm,
This kind of moonshot, statement that we're going to solve a disease or cure a problem, or at least hold for a certain demographic, a population, environmental concern, whatever it is, that we're going to really have some finite, concrete, deliverable,
yeah.
accomplishment. So, to us, it starts there, and then everything else follows, from that. How you name the organization, how you use the language to communicate that, and then to your point of creating awareness. If you have a clear, specific mission and vision, then creating awareness is going to be easier. That's not going to solve the problem. You still
Mm,
have to get out there in front of people, and tell them. You have to, it has to be clear on your website. To your point of looking at websites and saying you can't tell what the organization does, that's a problem. But
yeah.
if it's very clear, an organization, one laptop per child, even the name of the organization kind of tells you,
Mm,
what
and what
what
they
their
do.
mission is. How could you make it as crisp as possible? And organizations have a tough time because we do this and we do that, and we do the other thing. So many things
Yes.
want to get in there. That's fine, but provide an entryway for people, and then give them the next, help them pass through the next gate, and
Mm,
then the next one, and then the next one, so they learn more about you. Don't overwhelm them, with everything all at once.
oh, that
So
makes
you have to find those like hooks that can bring people in and enter your world, have show some concern, and connect with your mission on a visceral and emotional level, rationally justify, what you're doing, so they can see the impact, and there's some quantifiable metrics that you're delivering against, and then they can, be on your side, bring them into your world that way.
yeah. You've hinted at some triggers for which, a nonprofit might choose to refresh their brand. Maybe they've grown outside of their geographic area. Maybe they've added programming. Maybe their just mission doesn't make sense for, the modern space in which they operate. And you kind of hinted a little bit on like what does a refresh look like, or maybe what does it look like for an updating a brand? I mean, you had mentioned, if your mission is clear or your vision is clear, that makes it a little bit easier. But let's break it down in some more like basic steps on like, let's say that triggers there for me. I know I need to do this. What is the kind of the typical high level process that somebody might take? I think it becomes very overwhelming. Do we start with the logo? Do we start with this? Where should someone start when they think about refreshing a brand?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where should you start? And often it's based on the prompt that, originally, like, why are you calling us to begin with? So it could be,
Right.
it could be based on like fundraising. We're not doing as well there. It could be
Mhm.
that specific, we expanded services. Could be just a tipping point where, what we're doing is not working anymore. We really need to fix it. New leadership could come in, with a bold vision and want to, make a change in direction. Could be something very specific, like we are expanding, and we need to change. Did I mention the name? The name of the organization may not, work anymore. It may say,
Right.
Children's Society of Atlanta, and they're no longer just Children's or of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Geography could change, or society seems outdated. So there
Mm-hmm.
could be some fundamental, problems there. So we'd start the process usually with, first of all, understanding what the problems are. And we go through a discovery process. It could be one-on-one interviews, could be some focus groups, it could be a survey. Certainly a brand and marketing review, look at all the communications and the fundraising materials and emails, and get a sense of how the organization is talking about themselves, and what they're saying, and how are people responding. What are the click-through rates, the open rates, the donation response rates? Do a donor analysis. Have donations been going up or down over the years? What is their average donation, the repeat donation rate, the drop off, things like that. Get a sense of what are the good things that are working, and what are the problems. And then there's a findings and recommendations phase that could be, could show recommendations for any area. It could be, your mission and vision needs to be updated. It could be the name needs to be updated. Maybe they know that coming into it. It could be more strategic. Let's think about the organization and the services in a more cohesive way. We've done things a certain way up to this point, but in order to expand, we have to kind of consolidate some programs, or shift our emphasis on another program, or speak to a different constituency, and open doors to new partnerships. And so those are more strategic things. And if you look at the revenue, the pie chart of revenue, and we'd say, where has the most money been coming from, which is not often what the organization may actually be focusing on now.
Right.
So they may be putting a lot of emphasis on social media or some other areas that may not have a good return. And where is the revenue opportunity in the future, which may not be where it is currently. There's fewer Americans are donating to charities. More of the giving is coming from the top. There's a big wealth gap in the country. And so giving overall has increased, but that money is coming from fewer people, and it's going to from larger donors. So organizations may want to adapt and focus more on a major donor strategy, for example, and say, it's costing us too much to try to bring in lower level donors. And we don't want to do that. Or conversely, they may say, what, that's a important part of our mission is broad-based appeal, and we need to, maintain that, but maybe shift because they know it's costing them a certain amount of money to, to maintain that. So it's looking at those strategic questions, and then the recommendation is going to follow from that.
So we've talked about kind of messaging and communicating that message a little bit, and let's say that we are either evaluating our message, because you had mentioned all of these different consideration points, and I was kind of chuckling a little bit inside, and I think most people listening would feel like, oh, my organization's not even tracking those things, those different KPIs that you mentioned. And that's part of working with someone like you at Red Rooster Group. I'm sure you help organizations set all that up to really start tracking that data and make more informed decisions. But on a more basic level, let's talk about the message of what we're trying to say. And let's say maybe we've internally discussed and concluded on, a specific type of message. What are some tips for communicating that message, whether it's across different audiences, or maybe, how do you align with what the organization is trying to do, which can sometimes be very complex, to a very simplified version that an outside external stakeholder, whether it's a program participant or future program participant, or maybe a future donor, like, how do you help your clients navigate that? Because that's where I think internally we know what we're trying to do, but the words get lost when you try to.
That's true. People get mired in the complexities and nuances of
Yes,
issues. So
yes, we do.
a lot of jargon going on often.
Yes.
Which can be put off, but it doesn't have to be. Depending on who you're talking to, and I think that's kind of the key component. Who are you speaking to? Are you if you're in a very strong, I'll call it a tribal, environment, you're a cancer organization, and you're talking to people who have, cancer, or cancer survivors that have gone through that process, and there's a collective shared experience. Then there's a language that you're going to use that's different than appealing to people who are, outside of that, for example. So it kind of depends on, so the starting point is understanding, who you're talking to, what affinities they have, and trying to get, as much information that you can, about your audience, so what are the shared connection points that you have, with them? What's their worldview? Politics is a clear worldview, more government, control, less government control, for example, but does your constituency believe in, in helping people, empowering them, they could do good on their own? Do they, believe in, there needs to be a government safety net, or pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps? So the way that you articulate a story, could be very different, or your mission, how you communicate that based on, who you're appealing to. You're not fundamentally changing your mission or what you do, just how you're talking about it based on who you're speaking with. So understanding your audience is, the first thing, and trying to connect with them in a way that they would understand. Metaphors are a great way to try to communicate complex concepts easily. There was one of this idea of misinformation is like a drop in the bucket. Means like a small, that suggests like a small and and not consequential, versus the same amount, but it's like a pollution, a poison that's like 1 part per million, that it taints the whole bucket.
Right.
That's it. There are visual things that you could do just to communicate a complex idea, simply.
Interesting.
And, I think nonprofits often don't use metaphors enough. They try to be too cohesive or too comprehensive in trying to say too much. They want to get everything in there. But if you could just develop one framework, one idea that everything else could kind of fit into, that you'll have a little more success with helping people understand what you do.
Yeah, I love that, because I can really, that resonates with me, because, as somebody that does accounting work, and that usually immediately people kind of glaze over and tune me out once I start talking about that. And even for my own firm, why I love this conversation so much, because I have to always ask myself, how am I relaying like complicated things in a way that, number one, still keeps people's interest, number two, communicates this is maybe something you need, right? Or am I using the same language you think of when you're thinking of these things as well? And where I think nonprofits have an especially challenging position, they have completely different audiences from their program participants in many cases, and their donors potentially, right? And how do you appeal to both, right? For example, I work with one organization, and they work with, mental health services for children and suicide prevention. So a lot of their program participants would be schools, parents, students, young people that are involved in the program, but their donors are not necessarily those people at all. It could be something completely different. And so how do you communicate what you're trying to do in the technical fashion that's like, yes, this is the specialist I'm looking for, right? But then not so technical that your donors that are compelled to give to that particular cause is understanding what it is you're actually trying to do. So nonprofits have it especially tricky, I think, because they have so many different audiences. But
Totally agree. Totally agree. And you do need to communicate differently to those audiences. You need to, there's a different story to tell. There's a different way to go about it. There's even a different messenger, a different person who can tell the story. It doesn't always have to just, come from the executive director or the development director. Think about who's credible with your audience. So, in a case like that, you want to maybe have a suicide survivor, who can tell the story from their perspective. I know how I was in that dark place. This is what I was thinking, and that's reflecting exactly, what the audience, is thinking, and what they did to overcome it, or whatever situation that the audience would understand and really identify with, and in talking to a donor, it would be slightly differently, but it'd be finding that connection point where people do have dark times, and people don't always have support systems, and there are triggers, in your life, and you could identify with that. So if you can tell, those stories to those people, that they could identify something in their life that didn't go perfectly, or when they were in, a down, part, you can try to create that emotional connection, which is so critical. Stories are so critical for nonprofits, and the having them come from people who have experienced it is the best thing. And if you can't, though, there are plenty of success stories or outcome stories or participant stories that could be used. If you get them in first person, that's great. If not, you do want to have, though, a narrative arc. You do want to show the before, middle, and after states. And I think often organizations kind of cut to the happy ending part. Here's our the successful stories that we have, which are great to show,
Yeah.
but they won't have the same impact as having the transformation. People are
Yeah.
interested in the transformation. So you have to somehow get to the before state, even though it may be sensitive for many audiences, and then show how that person has changed their life or situation in some way as a result of your help or support, and don't underplay the value of what your organization did, and make that really clear. Was it a particular, case manager, Marie, who really listened and identified something and, encouraged me, or was it Kevin, who when I came back the third time, he was there for me, or, whatever it is that the donor can then see, the role that your organization is playing, in that transformation. But ultimately, the hero of the story, there is the person going through that journey, but also making the donor, an active hero by enabling, that to happen, with the success and the support, of the donors' contributions.
I love that. And speaking of fundraising, I'm curious from your perspective, switching a little bit away from messaging and more when I think of like branding, not just messaging, almost maybe like the aesthetic and the consistency across different channels. How do you see the most effective nonprofits leveraging kind of their branding across like different campaigns or events or their websites, or kind of what would you like to see in a perfect world if you were working with a client or implementing a brand refresh? What would that look like?
Well, here are a couple of different questions. One is like, I guess, what consistency looks like, and yeah,
Or is that
I
important?
mean,
Yeah.
it is. I mean, if you have a clear mission, to me, the implementation is a little less important. Yeah, I think some people are very, are sticklers for every, the font has to be the same everywhere and the
Yeah.
colors and all. Yeah, that's fine. It should be. It's good. I won't argue with that.
Yeah.
But I think the brand lives more with people these days than it does with the organization. I mean, you can control top down, to some extent, and you should have consistency. You should look, it goes to speak of your professionalism, your credibility, and the things that tell the donor or a participant that, hey, they have their act in order, they're going to do well. The participant that, they're going to actually be able to help me. They have a program that seems like it's well run and has effective outcomes. And it tells the donor, this is, well-managed organization. They look professional. They have the ducks in a row. They're going to steward my money in an effective way and not waste it. They don't look like they're haphazard and all that. So those are signals, to the world. But I mean, ideally, your brand is really like your reputation, which is kind of how you live up to the promise that you're making, in your mission. So, if you have an active social media, following, and they want to kind of make videos, for your organization on their own, and they're not following a brand dictum of fonts and stuff, let them tell your story. I mean, that's kind of the best thing you could do, is like have people empowered to feeling like they're inspired to go and, spread the word, about your organization. That's, at least that's my take on it.
Well, and I think about like what comes to my mind, since the name of this podcast is A Modern Nonprofit. And I've seen different organizations that try to, incorporate emerging trends, or really are proud of the fact that they want to take a modern approach to either their programming or their technology or their whatever it might be, right? And is their messaging or their branding or their outward appearance like reflective of how they think about themselves internally? So when I think of like branding too, and you brought up a great point, like words in your organization name that might be a little bit outdated, or is it not really clear what you do? Or is the fact that your website looks like it's, 15 years old, like, is it really speaking to the reputation that you're trying to project, or the image you're trying to project, or whatever that might be? I think about those things sometimes, and while it might seem a little insignificant to some people, I think it maybe matters to some people. I don't know.
It is. I mean, look, the brand is a living thing. I don't think that you create a logo and, and
Mm,
you have a brand guideline book and you put it on and and that's it. Everyone follows this and like, that's it. And we do that. So I'm
mhm,
not, but at the same time, it has to be, a living, breathing,
mm,
flexible, changing, organization that's reflective of society.
mm,
There's so much upheaval now. It's coming faster and faster.
yeah.
We have all these, the Tea Party, the Black Lives Matter, the politics now, women's rights and abortion issues are coming to the fore. I know not every organization
Well,
is
yeah.
political, and all
Mhm,
that, but even with celebrities and music and trends and
yeah.
and use of TikTok is just that kind of
Yeah.
taking over how people perceive have you look at the numbers of people on on TikTok and influencers, and so the old-fashioned hierarchical top-down way has its limitations, in terms
Mm,
of adapting to today's world, and the temperature and pulse is of culture is different, so you do have to be
mm,
responsive as an organization, and it's tough because you can make missteps too, and what's DEI is kind of coming back to bite people,
yeah.
and is the thing, and so but that's, to me, it's about always being relevant and responsive and seeing the feedback on a
Mm,
regular basis and adapting, and trying to maintain the pace of it, not just kind of setting it and then, and watching it, and waiting, but being active. I mean, talk about, to me, thought leadership, which is a kind of a misnomered, term, and people are using other language now, but basically means you're a leader in a field by virtue of being an expert and doing things that no one else is doing, that is leading the way, and that
mhm,
requires risk taking, and that
right.
could be failure. That's what, but you learn, and then you can advance. If you're just sitting back as an organization, which many organizations, their mantras is the way we've done it before, and there's kind of a status quo orientation, aversion to risk taking, then there's going to be a limitation that you have on kind of solving the problem or
Mm,
advancing the field or learning more about the needs of the constituency or whatever it is that you're trying to solve.
mhm,
So even for small organizations, I think that, that's important, is do something else that no one else has done.
yeah.
Make some progress and take some risks. You will have to educate and, donors, or be transparent about what you're doing, because, there's a little bit of aversion, but they will respect and respond to that.
Mm,
We've seen
mhm,
that with organizations. If you tell them, if you're trying to hide, but if you say, you know what, you're going to invest in a new pilot program, we
right.
learned this last year. We learned that kids love doing XYZ, or, this new text
Mhm,
app, could help, with graduation rates, or, like whatever it is, we want to deploy that more. We want, we
right.
need your help, to do that. Help us advance it, and then write about it and go to the circuits and go, go in the speaking and in your trade associations and things like that. That's real thought leadership. To me, that goes into the brand as much as like a logo and a font and all
Yeah.
that. How are you seen as an organization? How are you perceived? Are you actually out there in front when a major news thing happens on your issue? Are you saying something about it? You're not going to lose your 501(c)(3) status for writing an op-ed,
Right.
in favor of, kids or college tuition or whatever.
Right.
I know a lot of nonprofits shy away from advocacy, but
Yeah.
you need to be, your brand is in all areas, showing that you're present, that you're moving forward, that you're trying to solve problems, that you're responsive, to needs, and that donors, are going to appreciate and value that, and then, and step up to support you, because those are the kinds of organizations they want to support, the ones that
Yeah.
are actually doing something, making progress on an issue.
I love that advice of just not setting the brand style and kind of forgetting it, or not, accepting that it's a living and breathing thing. Seems like some pretty big pitfalls that an organization could have, and things could stale pretty quickly. As we kind of wrap up the call, is there any other like major pitfalls that you might suggest or warn nonprofit leaders when it comes to their branding?
Well, AI is a big thing, and you have to pay attention and you have to embrace it. I was at a session recently, and the speaker asked, feelings about AI. And when it came to like the negative response, almost everyone raised their, they're scared, they're cautious, things like that, as opposed to being optimistic and excited about leveraging this technology that could really enhance your organization. I'm doing a session on using AI to write more effective fundraising letters with sentiment analysis to get emotional resonance from donors and reflect that, in the letter, so you could use language and emotions that donors are feeling. There's great opportunities, and I think that's an undervalued resource at the moment for nonprofits. So, start to look at that. It's tough. There's a learning curve, but there is like everything, and you will only be left further behind, because as much as you could fear it and as many problems, as it faces, and look, there are problems with it. It's like social media, though, is not going away. So
That's so cool. That sounds very fascinating. And I'm sure as people are listening to this episode, Howard, they may want to connect with you or hear a little bit more about what you all are doing at Red Rooster Group. If an organization wanted to reach out and talk more with you about some of the resources that you're creating, or maybe even working with you with some of their branding challenges, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Where should they go?
if you go to our website, redroostergroup.com,
Okay.
and you can find the contact form there. You can find some free resources there for
Okay.
you as well. And if you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn, Howard Adam Levy. You can
Okay.
look me up, associated with Red Rooster Group, and we can connect.
Well, this has been such an interesting conversation. Now you got my wheels turning with this whole, I've heard of AI for like grant writing and obviously social media and probably newsletter writing, but the fundraising with like the emotional touch has sparks my interest. So thank you, for this conversation, for all of your words of wisdom when it comes to branding. I know that many people will find this conversation valuable. So I want to thank you again for taking your time and chatting with us.
Been a pleasure.
And for those of you that are listening, please, I'm going to do the shameless plug. Engage with this content in some way, whether it's sharing on social media, subscribing, rating, engage with it some way, because that's the way the meta world works. And it allows this information to be found by other leaders of nonprofit organizations like yourself that's trying to solve all of these common problems that we all seem to be facing. So thank you, friends, and we'll see you next time. Bye. That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Tosha Anderson with the Charity CFO, and this is a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to A Modern Nonprofit Podcast on all major streaming platforms so you will stay notified for when the latest episode drops, which will help you stay in the know about anything nonprofit related. Also, join our community on Facebook by searching for A Modern Nonprofit Podcast and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.